Here we go again. Australia's property market is frothing back to life.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. Where would you like to see the bidding start?
I was surprised by how quickly prices turned around.
710, 750 is it? 775.
We had a pretty tough year in the last 12 months. That has changed.
790. Okay, 790 now. 800.
At this rate, property values are set to recoup their recent losses within the next 3 months.
860,000.
Sydney and Melbourne are back on fire.
At $929,000. Should we say another one? Can't hurt. So are you absolutely sure?
Among those bidding in the inner western Sydney suburb of Ashfield, a winner emerges.
Sold. Congratulations, man. So very much.
A young couple who moved back in with mum and dad to save a deposit pays $932,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Did you pay much more just then than you were hoping to?
Oh, a lot more, but also, you know what, the price tag that we paid for it is for the property, but it's also to get out before it gets any worse, you know?
Or to get in.
To get out. In my head, I'm like, I just want to get out of having to look.
The winning bid is about $200,000 above the reserve.
What's happening now is real, but it's not sustainable. We can't keep having our house prices rise to these sorts of levels.
There's enthusiasm here, but also fear. Fear of missing out, of perhaps even being locked out for life from Australia's property market. With home ownership rates falling, there's a growing danger of Australian society being cleaved into 2 classes: those who own property and those who don't.
During the campaign, we reduced that quote to 1,450,000.
1.38.
Just too far away from where we need to be. I appreciate your offer, sir. You'll need.
A year ago, properties in our 2 biggest cities were becoming more affordable. The most significant downturn since the late 80s saw prices in Sydney and Melbourne fall by more than 10%. Prices bottomed out after May's federal election. Days after the election, APRA, the banking regulator, flagged changes that would make it easier for buyers to borrow more.
They really only took off once APRA's changes to lending rules took effect and those interest rate cuts from the Reserve Bank started to feed through into the economy.
Since the middle of the year, a couple of things have come along. Interest rate cuts, the election result, which saw negative gearing remain in place as it currently is, and a relaxation in credit. So those 3 things have been very powerful and have fuelled a quite remarkable pickup in house prices in such a short period of time.
The property downturn is far from over in many parts of the country, particularly regional areas. Nationally, in the 3 months to December last year, auction clearance rates were above 70%.
Hi there, welcome. Come on in. Are you registering today?
Affordability may be better than it was 2 years ago, but that doesn't mean much for buyers in Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart, because prices are rising faster than incomes.
So, congratulations.
A median valued property in Sydney now costs 8.5 times the typical annual household income. That's an increase of more than 25% in a decade.
We certainly have a housing affordability crisis in Australia. There are more and more people who are locked out of the market, and we see that in the falling rates of home ownership, which are now at their lowest levels in many decades.
Home ownership is falling really sharply amongst younger, poorer Australians. It's hard to see that that's anything other than worsening affordability that's driving that trend. And so it is a crisis where over the course of the next couple of decades, we're likely to see fewer and fewer Australians, particularly poorer Australians, own their own home, and that will have enormous consequences for all aspects of Australian life.
Analysis provided to 7:30 by the Reserve Bank confirms that rates of home ownership fell among every age group between 2011 and 2016. If this trend continues, far fewer retirees will own their own homes in decades to come. Between them, Dominic and Trudy Harris earn about $120,000 a year. They're hoping to achieve what their parents never could, buying a property their 8-year-old son Liam can call home.
We see what the median house price is down in Sydney at the moment. Now that would forever see me out of the home game.
We had a very loving, very close family, but never having owned a home, so we were constantly moving.
I suppose the lesson from my childhood that we try to teach Liam that I was never taught was, you know, to strive for a house.
Hey, good catch, dude.
I would love to be in the position to buy a house for Liam.
A house and land package like this one in Newport, north of Brisbane, costs $650,000. $180,000 beyond Dom and Trudy's budget.
So, as you know, this is the Stillwater 260.
That's beautiful.
It is a constant kind of up and down every weekend where we get excited and then we get deflated.
Look at that. I love the integrated.
In their chosen suburb of Newport, the average time it takes to save a 20% deposit is 11 years.
Thinking it's another 11 years to save to get into the market is crazy. Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is nice.
Wow.
They're hoping to cut their deposit to 5% by being one of the 10,000 Australians to qualify for the federal government's new first home deposit scheme.
Yeah.
Like it's house here, dogs in the backyard, Liam playing. Yeah. It would be nice to get a hand up, not a hand out. Yeah, I think the 5%'s a lot more achievable if we can get one of...
Than 20%.
Yeah, well, yeah. And try and be one of the only 10,000 every year.
I think the first home deposit scheme is another example of a policy that sounds good, that sounds like it's going to help, but in fact probably won't have much of an impact. But if the scheme was expanded, it would go from being ineffective to being counterproductive. So it ends up being a policy that really benefits vendors of the kinds of homes that are attractive to first home buyers. And that's exactly what we've seen with stamp duty concessions for first home buyers in Victoria and with her first home buyers grants in the past.
The grandson of Ray White, Brian White, was born into Australian real estate royalty. He does not believe Australian home buyers are facing an affordability crisis.
If you wish to live in Sydney and Melbourne, and that's important, then you're going to be stretched. Of course they're going to find it difficult buying in some parts of Sydney and Melbourne. But other parts they're going to be able to, you know, they can afford. They may not want to live there, but to say they can't afford to buy a home, it's not accurate. It is quite possible for someone to leave Sydney and move to quite a number of major centres where the house prices are only a fraction.
But work might be a challenge.
Work could be a challenge.
So it's not necessarily the case that people can leave Sydney and Melbourne and go somewhere else, particularly because they're in Melbourne and Sydney because that's where the jobs are, that's where employment prospects are, that's where services are. And so I think it's reasonable to expect that people should be able to live in those cities if we just allow enough housing to be built.
Is property still the best investment an Australian family can make, and if so, why?
It's an investment that gives such enjoyment during its ownership. There's a sense of family bonding through the family asset.
In Ingleburn, southwest of Sydney, Serena Ryan is proud of her home. But servicing her almost $400,000 mortgage can be a stretch.
How was school today?
Good.
Yeah? Do you do anything exciting?
Our mortgage, well, at the time I paid it and had our usual lifestyle habits, which I didn't think were that big, we had no money left. We didn't have any wriggle room. There was nothing. Just because you can borrow the money doesn't mean you should. I've realised how debt contains you, you are obligated by debt, and when you have that obligation, we're all forced to work much longer and harder than we need to be.
Although Serena's made sacrifices to better manage her mortgage, She wonders whether it's time to wake up from the home ownership dream.
Make sure they stay in the coop. Get out with I see friends who haven't got a mortgage, but they've been able to set themselves up without a house, and I kind of wonder, is it something that we just had to do because it's what our parents did?
Younger Australians are increasingly having to give up the dream of home ownership. The number of homeowners aged between 18 and 39 in Sydney and Melbourne has plummeted since 2002, picking up only slightly during the recent downturn.
When house prices are growing strongly, you see a big drop-off in the number of people moving into home ownership. But similarly, when house prices moderate, you see it pick up again. We're coming off very substantial declines in home ownership and in movements into home ownership. So we're really talking about a minor blip in the longer scheme of things.
Did you go all the way down or did you climb back up?
Back in Queensland, Dom and Trudy Harris remain doggedly determined to do better than their parents did and leave renting behind.
At this point in my life, it's the reason why I get up in the morning. You know, is to work towards that goal of owning a home.
Are we allowing one class of Australians to build for their retirement more easily than another class of Australians? And the answer to that is unequivocally yes, whether it's the way our superannuation system works and the tax breaks you get on that, whether it's affordability for an older generation who's already got their foot in the door versus younger people who are struggling to make that first down payment. We are creating a separate class of Australians, and that is not a society, an Australian society that I think most of us, if we think about it, is one that we want to see.
Yeah, here you go, well done.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.